Hello and welcome to Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan. We're on Talking Point discussing the coronavirus and its impact on China and the world. And we're also going to look at India. And I have with me Madhu Balla, who is a leading China scholar, formerly of Delhi University. And we have Jaydev Ranade, also a China scholar who heads his own think tank. Welcome. Madhu, first question to you. Reports about the death toll in this coronavirus exceeding 25,000. Is that credible?
I don't think that reports are about 25,000 dying. I think it's a little bit over 600 dying actually, deaths, and 2,500 about infected or under observation. But I think there are other views as well, both coming from inside China as well as outside China, that say that there are about 180,000 people under observation. So the scope of this is much larger than the official figures that we hear from China right now. The Chinese government is perhaps advisedly a little bit more cautious about putting out figures, but we certainly know that these are the official death toll figures, right? I mean, what you see on social media, you can't really give a lot of credibility to, because there's lots of false information as well, misinformation. But I think this is a very serious, situation for China right now.
Jaydev Ranade, the Chinese system of being able to control and manipulate information. Do you think they've been transparent at this point with this virus, comparatively compared to, say, the SARS virus so many years ago?
Well, they've learned over time how to better manage media, how to better manipulate the population. I'd say that. As far as this present crisis is concerned, they did try to suppress the news. They tried to suppress the messengers who brought the bad news. But I think after some time they realized that the epidemic was much larger than probably what they initially anticipated. And therefore they did begin sharing information. But that has raised by itself a number of question marks as to whether the number of people put out as being infected or as having died are accurate or not. Then the kind of measures they've taken by going in for home isolation, etc., whether they allow the government to really compute who all are really infected or not, or people have slipped through the net, if I may use the phrase. And I think so all this does come into the thing. There are also questions, of course, are the leadership and their slow response. But the fact is that by isolating the cities or closing down the cities, what they've done is stopped all supplies going in and out. So the hospitals have been affected. So now they've got to figure out a way of getting the supplies into the hospitals, which they hadn't calculated. And that is where the social media comes in. I think what she referred to, that there are a lot of posts coming on social media. People are expressing a lot of concern and much more anger as to the mismanagement that is taking place, shortage of medicines, etc., etc. So to some extent, there is more openness, but it is openness because I think they are unable to control it. And just to make one final point, you referred to this figure of 25,000, which is now, I believe, 27,000 dead, according to... this was actually first put out by their largest web server group called the Tencent, like Alibaba, etc. And the interesting part there is they put out the figure. It was taken down, I think, within some hours. Then they put out revised figures the following day, or the figure that had gone up the following day. And while doing that, they also replayed the previous shot. So whether they were trying to make a point saying that, this is actually now so much, or whether it was a mistake, one doesn't know. Yeah. But that is the solitary data that has come on such a high figure. There are others which talk about people not going home because they didn't want to infect their family members, people committing suicide, all that kind of thing. But I think all in all, it's a huge country. We have to remember that. And the manner in which it has happened, the manner in which it has spread, it sort of really stretched their resources, I would say.
Madhu, what does this tell us about how they're able to manage, an outbreak of this kind? Now, we've had something with the Nipah virus. Even earlier, there was the plague in Surat. Um, Comparatively, how do you think, the Chinese have done this?
Uh, I think the Chinese public health system is still pretty weak. I think they should have learned a little bit more from SARS. I think they did learn some lessons from the SARS epidemic about how to isolate the virus and communicate with the rest of the global scientific community on this, etc. But I think what's happened in China on the coronavirus thing, the more recent coronavirus thing, is that local governments have been a little tardy in responding and have not known whether they should actually put out the information or not. Whereas the central government has actually acted quicker on this, right? So there is a little bit of a hiatus between local government, central government responses to this. But I think once the center got a hold of this thing, I think the responses have been rational, they have been open, they have been pretty much open to, collaborating with the international community on the scientific aspect of this. And I think, as the World Health Organization chief said, China has done a pretty good job on setting up new hospitals, isolating people, taking the position that communities need to be, isolated, larger communities need to be isolated, as difficult as the decision is likely to be in terms of its practical consequences. And I agree that, when you isolate communities and isolate cities, you're not going to have that kind of, supply into cities as perhaps people need. And so there will be some, problems with doing that, maybe, people accessing all the things that they need, whether it's pharmacies accessing medicines or hospitals accessing medicines. But I do think that given the way in which the epidemic has emerged so fast, the Chinese government has not responded as tardily or in the manner in which it did for the SARS epidemic. And I think it also learned a very valuable public opinion lesson from the SARS epidemic, because during the SARS epidemic, a lot of information was hidden for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And people then protested on social media as well as across the world. I think there was a lot of questioning about how the Chinese reacted to that. The Chinese have learned some lessons from that. But it seems to me that local level bureaucracies and local level officials are still hesitant about putting out figures that show the government or show the country in a bad light.
Jaideep Ranade, I mean, when you look at the impact economically on China, what's your sense of how hard this is going to hit them?
I think it's going to hit them pretty hard. And I don't think we can, at least I would not venture an estimate right now, because a lot depends on how long this epidemic runs before it is brought under control. But right now, to quote Chinese economists, they have estimated, and this was on the 3rd of February, that from a growth of 6%, they had brought it down to 5.4. Now they have brought it down to 5. And they've said, well, this is the figure at the moment. If the epidemic continues for a while longer, we'll have to revise it. But 1% drop is already quite a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The second figure was an estimate by their financial news service saying that in the services sector alone, China has is suffering losses of $114 billion a week in the services sector alone. Frankly, I was quite surprised when I saw that figure. But then when you sit back and look at it and you find Wuhan shutting down, Wuhan alone, it's the R&D headquarters of a large number of these tech companies. There are military factories there. There are all kinds of things. They've shut 17 other cities in Hubei province, Beijing, Shanghai, so all of them. And what we are seeing are restaurants, shops, factories shutting down. People where there are a lot of people either visiting or employed. So obviously, services sector on that kind of scale is going to be hit. And what I'm seeing now that the Canton Trade Fair, for example, has been called off. So that's why I said we'll have to wait and see as to what the real extent of damage is. But it will be quite high from what I can see.
What impact could this have on the Communist Party, on Xi Jinping? Is he weakened by all this?
I think the Chinese economy sort of contracts by 1% as a consequence of the coronavirus epidemic, as Jaidev said. Certainly, and if you look at this in conjunction with the US-China trade war, which has already impacted the economy, the global recession, which has also impacted the economy, I think you're going to be looking at a Chinese Communist Party that will be questioned on its ability to deliver the economic promise that Xi Jinping has been offering, right? But the other thing is that, I agree that the services sector is the one that is largely hit right now. But I think overall, because China is so tied into the global economy, China is now the world's largest importer. China is now the world's largest exporter. Chinese tourists now provide the largest number of tourist dollars to various countries where they travel. The largest number of tourists who go abroad. I think it's not just the Chinese economy that gets affected, it's also the global economy that gets affected. And because, during the SARS epidemic, globally people thought that they have a large variety, a large number of suppliers, right? And so therefore they will not be hit very hard because of assembly line productions and because of the supply chain issues. But they realized that they were actually sourcing from one large manufacturer, which is mostly Chinese. Now, we don't know whether the same situation now pertains now, but we have seen already the effects of this, say, on the Japanese Nintendo production, right? We are looking at the fact that large multinational companies are closing down offices in China. Okay, so I think globally as well, if this impacts the global economy, SARS has shaved off 1% of the global economy. If this shaves off another 2%, because China is now the largest economy in the world, you're going to see a global impact as well. And what that means for everybody around the world, I think is fairly significant. I mean, some countries are less clued into the Chinese economy, some countries are more clued in. At least East Asia will be hugely impacted by this.
Jaidev?
I think Xi Jinping his image is severely dented, and I use the word severely, with due caution. There have been a series of events that happened, and he basically is the person who has been in charge, for example, of foreign affairs, of the military modernization, of their program for where they're headed, and each one of these has been hit. Each one of these, when announced, have also annoyed a number of people and not made China any friends. So if I just identify 2 or 3 main issues, I would say that the BRI that he took up, the Belt and Road Initiative, there was a lot of advice given by Chinese scholars and Chinese economists asking him to go slow and saying that before you launch it, at least get on board Russia, Japan and India, otherwise it will not succeed. He ignored it. I don't know what the calculations were in his mind, but the advice was sane. Today, and at that time, some of them had also said we have to work out whether we can actually afford to fund the Belt and Road to the extent that it was being discussed. Well, apparently now those questions have been raised again, saying that, and that is before this virus hit, saying that we cannot afford to spend so much, particularly after the US-China trade war started. The second thing is the kind of security measures that Xi Jinping has imposed. And that, I must tell you, that even during the outbursts, angry outbursts by the people, during this during the virus, they have actually said that it is the security systems imposed by Xi Jinping that are responsible for the problems. One is, of course, as she alluded, the city officials going slow on revealing figures. But the mayor of Wuhan expanded on that, and he said, I had to wait for clearance from Beijing before I could. So whether it is he going slow or whether the system, these are questions. But people have blamed Xi Jinping for the security system, and there they pointed to the doctor who first blew the whistle and now died, saying that, his death is at your door, kind of thing. So that is the second thing. And two of their very well-known Chinese professors, like Shu Changrong and of Tsinghua University, and another intellectual, Li Chu-yun, they have come out, in fact, categorically blaming Xi Jinping's security systems for all this. The third, which people do not factor in, is Hong Kong. I think that has really dealt a blow to China. For a while, the Chinese ignored it because the Chinese don't like the Hong Kong people, and they thought they were rich, they were brash, they were arrogant. But today, they are facing a situation where after 23 years of reverting back to China, the people of Hong Kong have basically said, we don't buy a one country, two systems, and we question the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. That is, raised a question. And followed by the Taiwan elections, where the pro-independence DPP has come in. So I think Xi Jinping is in a difficult position right now. And with this virus having incensed the people so much, with the academia and students already being, negative towards him, his position has certainly been weakened, and the other members of the Politburo will probably be waiting and watching to see how strong he emerges out of this or how weak he emerges out of this. But I would say, if I stick my neck out, that his next term, I think, there's a big question on it.
Madhu, do you expect any large-scale public kind of movement against Xi Jinping or even against the Communist Party?
I don't think you can expect a large-scale public movement. I think the way in which Xi Jinping has actually put in measures to control people, facial recognition, all the information, everybody, social credit system, that will sort of work against people getting out on the street and campaigning or creating a movement. But I do think that social media is a very effective sort of thermometer for what people are thinking in China today. And even though we think that, very often social media will have a lot of misinformation, but yet the opinion that comes through on Chinese social media, especially on this, in the last 2 days that we have seen, has been grief, and grief turning to anger. And that is significant because, in Hong Kong, for example, it was anger.
Yeah.
Okay. But here it is actual grief about what is happening to people and their lives and the way in which the state is responsible for all of this, right? And that has turned to anger. And that, I think, is very significant. But that lasts longer and it binds people more closely together. There are affinities that are created with that the party cannot then shatter. Right. So in a sense, I think that is significant. What we are seeing today, yesterday, today, and leading up to this, what we are seeing is very significant. And I think the questioning of the party by average people, by working class people, by students, by whoever, right, in China, it sort of breaks across class lines in China, right? And that is significant again. I mean, the last time we saw this happening was in Tiananmen Square, when the students were participating, but labor was supporting them. And the population of Beijing was supporting these students, right? We have not seen that in China for a long time. This time we are seeing the same thing, right? Now, whether it leads to a Tiananmen, we don't know, right? But the fact of the matter is that the party has to be responsive to this. And I think a lot of people are finding the party is no longer responsive, right? And that is a huge issue now today in China, at this moment in China today. So if the party can reflect on this and act quickly, and I think in a sense the central leadership has done that, but it has been overtaken by the death of this doctor who was the whistleblower, right? So how they are going to manage that, I don't know. Xi Jinping has to come out and say something, right? He said something in his New Year's speech, which was completely, which gave a completely, a picture that is not in consonant with what's happening in China today around the coronavirus thing. It was one of these cheery, bright, good future, good people, we're doing good things. And then suddenly you have this domestic situation which touches everybody, right? And you can't hide it from the world and you can't say this is not happening. right? So suddenly you have this, dysfunction between what he's saying publicly to the world and to his people and what is actually happening on the ground. And I think the Chinese people, like people everywhere, can see the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is, I mean, why is he so low profile, he hasn't said a word. Yeah, I think even the local media has not reported him saying anything.
He's become low profile. I think because he's been caught, shall I say, unprepared or unawares. As she rightly said, his New Year's address had not a word about this virus, and that was, mind you, it was delivered well after the news broke. He otherwise, he dominates the media in China. The first item on the state-owned China Central Television or the People's Daily or the newspapers. First front page news is Xi Jinping. But since I think the 21st of January, he has disappeared. He's not there till just 2 days ago, I think. He is not there. He didn't appear in Wuhan. What he did was he sent the Premier Li Keqiang, whom he has also made chairman of this new central leading group for looking after the virus. He has sent a Politburo member, Sun Chunlan, and he has sent the chief of the public security apparatus, Chao Ke-che, to Wuhan. But he hasn't gone. So some people, in fact, have actually raised that question. So I think that is why I said, and as far as the Chinese Communist Party is concerned, it is looked up as the provider of wealth, of comfort, of security, etc. Today, that is being questioned. And which is what brings me again to this Hong Kong point, that Hong Kong, in any case, they have said, we question the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party or whatever. And when it tried to impose its will, the demonstrations were even larger. So now, what exactly is going to happen with them questioning it, with the domestic people losing confidence in the Chinese Communist Party? I think the situation is pretty, difficult. But to your point about whether it will break out onto the streets, whether there will be another kind of uprising, I tend to agree with her that probably not yet, at least not what we can see. I think it will be more of an inner party tussle. And that's what I said. They're probably waiting for seeing, what Xi Jinping will do. And there are, mind you, at least 3 people who are not his loyalists in the Politburo, in the Politburo Standing Committee. So they might decide to say that, all right, you've done what you had to do. We will not let you lose face, but when your term ends, you go. And meanwhile, share a bit more power, or something like that may work out. But the worry, I think, for the leadership will also be whether all this questioning and anger gives impetus to the restiveness in Tibet and Xinjiang. I think that is another worry that they will have.
What do you expect the army? Do you think the army will stand by Xi?
So far, there are no signs of the army not standing by or not obeying Xi Jinping. They've been called onto the front line. In fact, most of the medical work in Wuhan and in Hubei province is being done by army doctors and army nurses, army personnel, military personnel. So he's banking on them. But in the army itself, he's been carrying out successive ideological education campaigns and purges, and he's promoted a whole lot of people. So he's put his men there. But that doesn't guarantee anything. I mean, if the party itself is going to turn, then the army will follow suit, I guess.
But the army has never actually ever opposed the party. There was one instance during Tiananmen where, the commander sort of said, well, I'm not going to fire on the students. That was the only incident, right? Otherwise, the army has never actually not supported the party through thick and thin. The army is the party's army.
It is not a national army.
It's not the state's army. So I don't think the army is going to turn against Xi Jinping. And I think the army sort of takes its cue from not just Xi Jinping, but also the military affairs committee. There are other people within the party that are also linked to the army. It's a lot of generals within the military affairs committee, in the Politburo, etc. So the army is very much clued into the party in any case. I don't think they're going to see a military coup in China. Never. I don't think it's ever going to happen, frankly. I think ideologically as well, the position of the army vis-a-vis the party is fairly well set, very well sort of settled. And there has never actually been a debate on that one. Right? We may still have debates here on whether the army should be, apolitical or whatever it
Yeah.
is, and looking at Pakistan and all that, but not in China. So I don't think the army is, it's likely to do any such thing. But I think the public opinion will actually impact the parties and the decisions the party makes, the debates within the party, and whether the party should be more responsive, whether there should be a little more openness in terms of information,
Yeah.
right? And whether in fact, how do you actually create more faith within communities in China, right? I think that's a big issue, and whether in fact people are going to be looking at the party, as Jaidev said, as a provider and as a giver, or whether they're going to say, okay, we have to chart our own course outside of the party, right? And because in the Hong Kong thing, I spoke to mainland Chinese students, and they said, the party is doing everything, and why are Hong Kongers, challenging the party? They're just embarrassing us globally. So that was their position from Tsinghua University. This is China's top university, right? And this was their position, and they were very strident in their opposition to what Hong Kong people were doing. But I think now that has swung. That's the important thing.
Let's look at India. Do we gain or lose anything from what's going on in China? I mean, are there any lessons in it for us?
I think there are lessons in it for us. I think we need to also step up maybe our public health system for one, right? India has also been prone to epidemics of various kinds. We had the plague in Surat, for example, where we learned a few lessons, but we also did a couple of things that were awful. I mean, we were not able initially to do much about it, and the plague emerged out of the completely unhygienic conditions in the city. Our urban centers are unhygienic and dirty, right? So the Swachh Bharat thing that the Prime Minister started off 5 years ago isn't showing many results, right? Now, the Nipah virus was another thing. But the Nipah, I think we learned a few things. We learned how to isolate people. We learned how to respond quickly to this. We learned how to, deal with this. And we learned how to actually look at, do the scientific work around, isolating an epidemic. So we were pretty good on that one. But I think on the whole, we still need to have a better public health management system, right? We need to have, at the primary health level, much more presence of medical staff, of paramedical staff, of the kinds of drugs that are necessary to contain diseases, right? I don't think we have that right now at all. And I'm not sure whether this government has been effective in actually framing a policy to that end. We don't hear anything much about that, right? The other thing was is that because these epidemics are now global, they have become pandemics, right? We need to then therefore think in terms of how we deal with the pandemic, because people are traveling, and already we have evacuated, over 500 students from Wuhan itself. And we have many more students in China and other cities. So we can isolate them in Manesar today. But, if we didn't have barriers to trade, for example, if we were caught off guard, so what were you going to do about this one? So, in a sort of localized way, the government has acted, and has acted well, I guess, and rationally and reasonably. But I think on the whole, we need a better public health education system, a public health delivery system that can deal with any kind of pandemic that we are confronted with, over the years. So we need to really do that. We need to put some money into that. The budget, I don't think, indicates that we are doing any such thing. The budget has just come out. Coronavirus pandemic has been there for the last month. There's no reflection of any of that in the budget, for example. So our social sectors, I think we need to strengthen those.
Jaidev?
Well, there are two layers to your question, I would say. One is, as she mentioned, about the direct impact on our preparedness in terms of medical preparedness, sanitation, etc. These are things which will take time. Regardless of which government is there, to get the people to be to themselves realize that they've got to be clean, they've got to maintain a certain level of hygiene in the surroundings, etc. At least people are talking about it. Let's hope that something happens. We've at least seen more public toilets come up, things like that. But this is just a very small step that we need to go. The problem from tackling such a epidemic, if it comes here, is basically our primary healthcare centers. Now, China has boasted for a number of years that they've got barefoot doctors, they've got primary health centers going. So what happened? So I think we need to sit back and see, did they really have them? Were they just paper centers or not? And if they really had them, then why didn't they function? Because we don't have that infrastructure yet. So we got to start trying to build it. The second is our capacity to deliver medical supplies and medicines when required. Of course, one advantage we do have is that we would probably be quick to appeal where we have shortages. We have basically, I think, more or less a streamlined system of centralized control of where our medicines are. So we would be able to get those. I think that way probably will be quicker. But then again, on the other hand, you don't have the doctors deployed where they should be, etc., etc. So that's one part. But the second part of your question of how we'll be impacted, I would say that, seeing what has happened there, seeing the economic hit that China has suffered, I think they will probably now spend some time trying to recuperate. And if things are really being tackled in Beijing, then I would expect that, rationally speaking, there'd be a cooling off on the aggressiveness and assertiveness that we have been seeing in the last few years, particularly on China's neighbors and with regard to us. So if that happens, well, that's a good thing.
Good, yeah.
And also the impact on the military preparedness. If their growth rate slows down or stalls, then I have already been reading about the US-China trade war, so-called trade war, having an impact on defense production in China. So if this virus has had, and it seems it will have, a big impact on China's growth rate, the amount of money available to them, etc., then I expect that they will probably rationalize their build-up. These are things which are good. I mean, I think for at least our neighbors in the short term. Later on, of course, one doesn't know. But there is always a wild card. I mean, if Xi Jinping feels threatened, if he feels that he has to fight to maintain his position, and mind you, Chinese history is replete of leaders trying to do this, then he might decide to have a little adventure somewhere to try and divert the people's mind and to tell them that he has got back some of the prestige. And, whether he does something in Hong Kong or somewhere else to show that at least he's still moving towards achieving the reunification of China or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that is, at the moment, from what I can see, it would be, should not happen.
Yeah. On that note, Jaidev Ranade, Madhu Balla, thank you very much. Pleasure to hear your views.
Thank you.
Thank you.